Sony's reluctance on enabling crossplay for PlayStation 4 continues to be a big topic of contention. The discussion surrounding the issue really heated up when Sony not only restricted crossplay for Fortnite, but also locked Epic Games accounts of anyone who logged into PS4 to the platform, essentially holding players' progression hostage in order to strong-arm them away from playing the game on competing platforms like Xbox One and the conveniently portable Switch. It would be one thing if they just restricted crossplay, but it's a whole other thing to lock down people's third-party accounts without warning. The company's justification on the matter has been dismissive at best and complete horseshit at worst. We have seen the likes of Shawn give your typical "we're listening to feedback" response, and most recently, Sony CEO Kenichiro Yoshida stated that they're restricting crossplay because he believes that other consoles are worse and that PlayStation 4 offers the best user experience for Fortnite players. Except that's actually not true because Fortnite on PS4 is the only version of the game that offers a caveat. No other platform permanently restricts or cripples your Epic Games account, and otherwise the game plays pretty much identically across all platforms save for differences in input methods or in graphical fidelity. But more importantly, Yoshida's statement is a blatant lie, and what he's doing is using the guise of wanting what's best for the players to justify their completely business-driven decision. If they're going down this path, the least they could do is be straight about it, rather than attempt to sell something inherently restrictive as beneficial. Now, word has been getting around about Sony's latest attempt to talk their way out of this predicament, and one of the people it reached was corporate vice president of Xbox, Mike Ybarra. In response to what Yoshida said, Mike added his own 2 cents with the following tweet, which reads, quote, "Sony still isn't listening to gamers. All games should be crossplay and progression, with the right input flexibility and gamer options." Then, responding to a user who retorted that you can't blame them and that it makes sense from a business standpoint, while pointing out that PlayStation has been beating Xbox for years, Mike said, quote, "We run Windows and console. Larger gaming audience who wants to play together. Gaming is diverse. If you only serve to bring joy to part of an audience, then you're behind in many, many ways." Now, some PlayStation fans defending crossplay restrictions will likely react by saying something along the lines of, "This is rich coming from the same company that restricted crossplay in the last generation of consoles when they were in the lead." Yes, to some extent, I can see how some might see this as hypocritical, but there are a few things to keep in mind. Number 1, Xbox was under completely different leadership back then, headed by the infamously disgraced Don Mattrick. This is the guy who tried to restrict players' ability to lend or sell used games, the guy who wanted to require Xbox One to be always online for it to perform its functions, to force people to keep Kinects plugged in, so on and so forth. It was not long after Sony viciously exploited the negative PR surrounding Xbox One that Don Mattrick was ousted from the company before Phil Spencer took over, and since then, the platform has been much more focused on consumer friendliness. All initially planned restrictions for the console were completely removed, cross-buy between PC and Xbox One was implemented with the Play Anywhere program, cloud safe storage was made completely free, and the company has been actively pursuing the standardization of cross-play alongside Nintendo, a feature that would greatly benefit both players and developers. So say what you want about Xbox's past decisions, but looking at the present, there is no denying that they've made some great turnarounds in how they handle their services. Number 2, features like crossplay and cross-saves weren't anywhere close to being as commonplace back then as they are today. In our modern day and age, during a time when the world is more interconnected than ever, where massively popular multiplayer games like Fortnite and Minecraft are on the rise, the significance of crossplay has never been more important, and that importance will continue to grow. Yes, there probably wasn't as much backlash against the Xbox 360 when it was reported that Microsoft was the one being stubborn back then, but this was also back when crossplay was a far less prominent topic of discussion. Times have changed. The trend towards the standardization of cross-saves and cross-play is clear, and it's a trend that most gamers and developers generally support. Some gamers worry that discrepancies in performance and input methods between platforms will result in crossplay being detrimental to competitive gameplay, but keep in mind that it is an optional feature that can be toggled by individual players. If you prefer an even playing field and just play with people on the same platform, you can do that. As long as crossplay is smartly implemented, it won't cause any balancing problems. Last but not least, number 3, yes, Xbox totally did the same thing last generation by refusing crossplay, but when PlayStation prides itself on mottos such as "for the players," then they have a responsibility to rise above other companies' questionable decisions and take the high road. I don't believe in the notion that just because somebody else did something crappy before, it excuses others doing the same thing now, especially a company that advertises itself as being pro-consumer. That's the kind of mentality that will lock us in a vicious cycle where progress will never be achieved because we'll be focused on getting back at each other rather than on working together towards a better future. Somebody has to break the cycle eventually if we want to move forward, and with the way Sony has constantly touted how PlayStation 4 is the console for gamers, with how they lambasted Xbox One initially for their anti-consumer models back when Don Matrick was in charge, I would have expected Sony of all companies to take the high road on this one. Now, regardless of what I say, there will be hardcore Sony fans who will defend the company to no end, and to some degree, I understand the devotion. After all, they published some of the most beloved games in history, and they continue to push out some of the best games this generation. But even our heroes need to be held accountable. In fact, it's especially our heroes who need to be held accountable, because they are the ones with the most potential to make a positive change, and we have the most to lose from our heroes being led astray. In my opinion, it's one thing to be devoted to a game company, but it's a whole other thing to just blindly justify holding back positive change for gaming out of sheer apathy or fandom, just to feel good about saying, "Ha, suck it, competition." I get that the cross-play and cross-saves issue won't affect everyone, and in turn, it's easy for the people who won't be affected to get into the mentality of, what's the big deal, who cares, stop criticizing this game publisher I like for something that to me is trivial. But there is a significant crowd out there who feel as though Sony's restrictions is hampering a much welcome feature, one that won't affect or harm those apathetic towards it. Another common excuse I hear is that Sony is a business and that restricting cross-play while they have the lead is a smart business decision. Well, I would actually disagree that this is a smart business decision in the long term, given all it's done for Sony is garner negative PR. Not to mention that lifting cross-play or cross-save restrictions won't give the competition that much of an advantage, as Sony continues to produce the steadiest stream of top-notch titles, which is what's ultimately driving PlayStation 4's success. And B, a smart business decision and a shitty decision are not mutually exclusive. Pushing for loot boxes is a smart business decision, but that doesn't detract from how they hamper games' design integrity. Similarly, some might call restricting cross-play and cross-saves a smart business move on Sony's part, but that doesn't excuse how it hampers the standardization of a great feature. I often feel as though some people give Sony a pass on this because they're Sony, but if it were EA doing something similar, most wouldn't be justifying this as being business smart. See, I don't believe in the notion that some company should get special treatment and be exempt from being called out for questionable decisions. Don't get me wrong, I hold Sony in much higher regard than the likes of EA, by a long shot, but it would be dishonest to not discuss some of my qualms with Sony out of personal preference. Of course, Sony's restrictions aren't anywhere near as bad as EA's loot boxes. The former is an inconvenience, whereas the latter ruins games and psychologically preys on unwitting victims. But again, I figured Sony of all companies, who are held in higher regard in the gaming community than most other publishers out there, would rise above the occasion, would go above and beyond last-gen Microsoft, and do the right thing by consumers, instead of just doing what they deem to be business smart. At the very least, Sony needs to change their policy regarding locking people's accounts to PlayStation 4. Don't want to enable cross-play? Okay, fine. Inconvenient, but not the end of the world. Locking down accounts, though, in an era where progression is becoming more and more tied to game accounts, the way Sony is exploiting their dominance to hold third-party accounts hostage and twist people's arms that way is far less palpable. They need to at least release players who unwittingly linked their Epic Games account to PlayStation 4 without knowing they'd be chained to the console. They need to at least change that aspect of their policy so that progress from third-party accounts can be carried over, and then maybe Sony will have a much easier time skirting around the crossplay discussion. That's my stance on the matter anyway. I'd love to hear what your take is on Mike's response to Yoshida's statement and Sony's continued apprehension towards lifting current restrictions in the comments below. With that, I would like to end this news update. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoy my content and would like to support this channel directly, consider donating on Patreon. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Yong Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Yong out.